Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? This week we have a variety of items of news. Everything from anti-vaxxers spouting new theories about what FDA approval really means, as though for some reason they know exactly what the FDA is doing when the FDA supposedly doesn't. Long-term COVID infections and whether or not you're likely or unlikely to develop them. An interesting new glue being made for sealing wounds, but derived from barnacles. And weird animals. These and other news items can be found in the timestamps in the description box below. Let's start with the FDA, CCP virus, and anti-vaxxers. As is nearly always the case, once you meet an anti-vaxxer's expectations once, they simply move the goalpost further along, continuing to make it impossible to satisfy their expectations, as there's always something more. The most recent conspiracy theory regarding the Pfizer vaccine for the CCP virus specifically looks at the relevance of the full FDA approval and the emergency use authorization. The argument is several-fold. One of these is that it's actually two different drugs, or in this case, vaccines, that have been approved. Second, that because they have the full FDA approval, that the Pfizer vaccine should no longer have the emergency use authorization. These two are the strongest arguments by the anti-vaxxers, and we'll address them as a result. First is the argument that there are two different vaccines, and the simple reality is no, there's not. Pfizer has named their vaccine, and seemingly primarily for marketing purposes, but in no way, shape or form have they created a new second vaccine. The approval is for the same vaccine, and the FDA and Pfizer have both confirmed these details. The second part of their theory is a very tortured interpretation of what's been announced, and involves the approval of both the emergency use authorization and the full approval by the FDA. There's a simple reason why both are currently still in effect. The full FDA approval is only for those who are about 18 years and older, although it may be as young as 16 depending on certain interpretations of the law. Everybody who's down to 12 years old would not be able to access the vaccine if only the full approval was in effect. The emergency use authorization allows that to happen. That is, if you are between 12 and 18, or it's possibly as old as 12 and 16, you can get the vaccine under the emergency use authorization, but not under the full FDA approval. If you were to take away the emergency use authorization, there is a 3-year age group and a fairly large percentage of the population who would immediately lose access to the vaccine if they wish to take it. These two arguments are the strongest that the anti-vaxxers have been able to present. They also tout things to do with the Nuremberg Code, issues to do with liability, and so on. Many of these are based on either complete misunderstandings, lack of knowledge about current law, let alone from the middle of the 20th century, and more. The key takeaway with this was that children would be able to continue to access the vaccine, and this is an ongoing key issue. One reason simply is that we don't know how long children are going to remain relatively immune, and particularly why they are immune. With the Delta variant, it is affecting younger and younger individuals. We've shifted from an over 50, and in some cases over 60 primary cohort, all the way down to 30 now. And that is most of the adult population. And yet children are still better protected. The question is why? This is where an article from the Scientific American might be of some use in understanding what's happening. It covers a number of different investigations. Some of these regard the immune system and others the mucous membranes and how they provide better protection. Notably, something we've mentioned with regards to some case studies is the interferons and how their role in fighting viruses, in this case, is beneficial. In other case studies, we've mentioned how it could play a role in some of the complications we're seeing with the CCP virus. Interferons are particularly suitable for dealing with viruses, but there are also other things that are needed. Particularly some of the receptor molecules that then play a role in activating the immune system and getting those interferons pumped out. From here, we also have the activation of a series of other immune system parts, particularly the adaptive immune system, sometimes called the acquired or specific immune system, which is what is better at dealing with viral infections. It also helps to keep the immune system going for longer. The adaptive, acquired, or specific immune system has a memory, and because it has a memory, if you get infected or exposed to an infection a second time, it can deal with it much better. Many of these cells, at least in the case of children, already live in the mucous membranes, the point of infection for the CCP virus. Because of this, you can skip a number of steps in recruiting these cells to help defend the body from infection. And this begins to identify some of the distinguishing features between the adult immune system and those in children. The adult immune system appears to have some more difficulty, or at least delay, in recruiting the necessary immune cells. Because of this, the inevitable effect is that it takes longer to mount a defense, and by the time the body has the immune system there taking action, some infection has already begun. And in some cases, a lot of infection has already begun to happen. This is noteworthy as there is a transition period from very young children who have lots of interferon activity, lots of cells in their mucous membranes, and the decrease over time as they mature, particularly in that late teenage bracket to early adulthood. These individuals are in the point in time where their body's immune system is beginning to wean itself off of this very active approach, and instead more stagnated or at least static defense. That's why the adults don't respond as well. Their immune system is simply not set up to respond to a new threat as readily as children are. That is one of the big reasons why vaccines are so important to that age group, the age group that the emergency use authorization is being kept in effect for. You'll see from the images now that vaccines are doing their job, and this flies directly in the face of what many anti-vaxxers claim. Diseases were already on their way out before vaccines came in. Well, yes, to a certain extent they were. That's largely hygiene and similar. The fact that we know that certain diseases spread certain ways doesn't mean that we can make them go away entirely. That was until vaccines came into effect. And you can see with these images just what impact vaccines are having on controlling the spread. The simple reality is something we've mentioned in past "What Were They Thinking" videos. The percentage of individuals who are vaccinated and then go into hospital is a fraction of the percentage of individuals who are not vaccinated and go onto hospitals. Remembering relative percentages here. If you have 100 individuals and 10 of them are vaccinated and 1 goes into hospital, that's 10%. If you have 90 individuals who are not vaccinated and 45 of those go into hospital, that's 50%. Relative percentages are very important, especially when we start looking at things like this. The standardized numbers that are available from various hospitals show that there's about 431 hospitalizations for every 100,000 unvaccinated people. This compares to the approximately 26 people per 100,000 who are vaccinated and go to hospital because of the CCP virus. A roughly 17-fold difference. Further to that is the weekly average of hospitalisations. If you look at the trend for fully vaccinated individuals versus the unvaccinated cohort, you'll note that there's a relative consistency in the vaccinated cohort versus wild swings in the unvaccinated cohort. This comes back to the early goal of trying to lower the bell curve. In this case, the bell curve in the fully vaccinated cohort is permanently low, which is far more manageable than wild ups and downs of the unvaccinated groups. Further to the notable improvement in the overall effect of vaccines in reducing infection rates, there's evidence to support the theory that being vaccinated reduces the incidence of long COVID. They are COVID cases that have long-lasting side effects, an obviously undesirable situation. The study appeared in The Lancet, and the simple summary of it shows that the people who have at least both vaccinations in a 2-vaccine regime or a single dose of a single regime are less likely to exhibit the symptoms of long COVID. This data is somewhat more substantial than other studies in terms of its sheer number of people involved, approximately 1.2 million adults. Although this is retrospective, so that's one thing to be aware of, and one otherwise unavoidable and unfortunate drawback to the study. Reducing the probability and impact of long COVID is going to be more important going forwards, as it appears that the Delta variant is causing more and more cases of this to happen. Going now from vaccine and CCP virus specific information and news to an interesting grant that's being given by the Canadian government. Although very broadly speaking, it appears the Canadian government has given nearly $300,000 into anti-vaxxer research of how big pharmaceutical companies use their money to try and encourage people to be vaccinated. The problem with the article in question, or at least the research that it's talking about being funded, is that at least a number of the key players within it are well known to be involved with the sharing of vaccine misinformation and moving against vaccines in general. Not a particularly good situation to find yourself in when you're asking for money from the government to investigate how companies like, say, Pfizer, Moderna, and similar go about getting people to actually use vaccines. This is particularly important at the minute where there is a rather large percentage of the population who are hesitant to take the vaccines that are available. There is a certain irony in the Canadian government funding research by anti-vaxxers, while at the same time pushing for vaccines to be used by the wider population. Going from research into anti-vaxxers, or at least by anti-vaxxers, into research into ways to seal organs. And this is where the new glue that we spoke about earlier comes into play. It's a paste that's used to seal organs and thereby prevent bleeding, and it cures in seconds. This could, in theory, be incredibly useful when we talk about emergency surgery or stopping substantial wounds such as bullet holes, stabs, or workplace accidents. The underlying idea isn't actually that new. You may know of superglue. Superglue wasn't developed for use around the house or in workshops or anywhere else. It was instead originally developed to seal wounds in the battlefield. As a result, although medical superglue is now somewhat different, it does achieve the same general result. This new development is looking at that same process and going, we can do one better. When the researchers looked at an animal experiment with this in mind, specifically heart and liver injuries, they couldn't get the bleeding to stop using normal surgical methods. When they used their paste derived from barnacles, it took 10 seconds, but the wounds were sealed. In testing, the researchers found that the glue that they were using was able to put up to twice the pressure of blood flow, or at least expected pressure. It's also significantly stronger than current options available. Further to these benefits, it can work in a live, beating heart and achieve the seal it needs to make. That's an important caveat to this. The heart doesn't need to be stopped for it to work. Based on this information, you certainly don't want the glue to stay forever. That would get in the way of the heart healing and actually interfere with its function. The researchers have found, based on their investigation, that it lasts, or at least begins to deteriorate notably, within 12 weeks. This means it could achieve some of the same benefits as sutures as they're used in medicine now, but they also don't need to be removed as it will break down over time. It also has certain benefits over other options in that they can cause damage to the body over time through damage to the local tissue. Unfortunately, evidence about that isn't as clear yet. The only information available is from about 1 month after the application, at which time it didn't appear to be showing any kind of damage. As with most of these very early clinical results, more research will be required. Next we go from interesting medical news to interesting animal news. And an Italian shark in an aquarium in Sardinia has given virgin birth. It's taken 10 years since the shark was put into a large tank with another female shark, and yes, they are both definitely female. What is unusual is that this is possible. It's a process known as parthenogenesis. And there are about 80 species that we know of that can undergo this process. That is, creating offspring without another member of the same species to provide half of the genetic material. Perhaps we should start a church of the shark, and this could be the very first religious figure. Going to other animal news, and this time Australia, which nearly always has the weirdest animals. A bird in one of their zoos has started mimicking a crying baby. This is not just any bird, it's a lyrebird, or the superb lyrebird. As its name might suggest, they're capable of recreating a great many sounds. Some of them are more unusual than others. Everything from a camera shutter right the way up to the complexities of a crying baby. Other examples from this particular bird include power drills and the evacuation alarm. Other birds have been shown to have different sound skills they've learnt over life. These can include a variety of other construction sounds, other bird songs, and more. The final news we have for you this week is all about the International Space Station. The Russian cosmonauts on board have discovered damage to the Zarya model of the ISS, and they're concerned it could be spreading. This is rather concerning. When you are stuck in space in a limited structure and one of the pods that you're in begins to break up, you need to know what's happening, because if it grows and you're forced to jettison that particular part of the ISS, it could create a lot of problems. The Zarya module was the first of the modules ever launched for the ISS. It's also called the Functional Cargo Block. It went into orbit in November 1998, coming up now on 23 years ago. When you consider the ISS was, at least relatively recently, expected to be coming towards the end of its functional life, it's no surprise that parts of it are beginning to break down. hopefully the ISS will continue working until the end of its current expected lifetime, somewhere around 2025. By that time, it's hopeful that both NASA and or China will have finished production of a new space station that can be used for astronomical research. That's all the news we have for you this week. Thank you for watching. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.